My screen, y'all good? Yes? Okay. Yes, right. You're all on mute. Never mind. Um, if you can't see, please send a chat to Chelsea so I know. So I call this getting the most out of special education. For those of you who are veterans to this, you know that there's a lot to this. For those of you who are newer, I don't want to overwhelm you, but I do want to give you some information so that you're prepared as you move on. So just so you know, the young lady that's on the right there is my daughter, Kelsey. That's her graduation picture, and her service dog got a gown too, which was kind of funny. And one of her really good friends, Anthony, and they were part of a really great program in Illinois that included a lot of transition. So I am very heavy on transition, which I can't, again, that's something I spend all day talking about. And I actually told Rhonda if she wanted me to do a whole separate session on transition planning, I would be happy to do that. So I'm going to just kind of touch on a few things, starting with the law, okay? We have a few laws that are that pertain to education or kids in schools. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, a lot of times you'll hear my kids on a 504. It's really just, it prohibits discrimination. That's all it does, okay? And it's supposed to level the playing field. So that's why you can have accommodations as long as they don't give the student an advantage over others. Okay. Now, a 504 plan is also used in colleges, but as I was kind of touching on before, they don't just take the 504 that you had in high school and transfer it over. So you still want to make sure that you have updated any kind of evaluations, because you want to be able to take that to the college. You have to actually go to the Office of Disability Services, sign up, and go through their process. So it's not just a slam dunk. And if you don't have updated evaluations, like my daughter was out of school for a while and then she went back. I had to go and get a new neuropsych, which cost me about $2,000. So try and get any evaluations you can while the school still pays. Okay, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is really talking about specialized instruction based on individual needs. That's the IEP that you hear about. It's for kids from 3 to 21. And the caveat there is if you have a kiddo who's graduating from high school and they're going to take their diploma, they're going to walk and take their diploma, they're done. There's no adult transition services for them. Now, if your child decides that you're not going to take, like what we do with my daughter is we extended her 1 year. We called it a super senior year. So she walked with everybody, but she didn't get her diploma until a year later because I wanted her to get more services. Okay. And it's all based on what your child needs. And I'll talk a bit more about that. The ADA is really with regards to physical access. So public buildings, obviously anything covered by the ADA, any public place has to provide physical access. And Yadviga, I saw a question that you had specifically about accommodating a stander. And if a school is not going to accommodate your child's equipment, that is an ADA violation. So the way it should be thought of is your child's equipment is the priority, not the exception. So it's really important to be very vocal. Like, my daughter, she's in her wheelchair. Those are her legs. I can't ask her to take her legs off just to fit through an aisle, right? So just keep in mind. Each state may have additional protections, but they never can supersede federal law. They can be more strict, but the minimus is the federal law, okay? So 504 plans, again, these are just accommodations. So if you have a child that has a physical or mental impairment, it has to limit at least one major life activity, and I've listed them here. Okay. The disability has to be determined by a professional. So typically what we do, if we're going to request a 504, we're going to do something in writing. And everything should be done in writing, by the way, nothing should be verbal. We're going to go in and show evidence of why we want a 504 plan. So what are the major life activities that are being hindered, that are preventing learning? Okay, so there's all sorts of things that could be there. If you have a child with ADHD, you may have testing modifications, priority seating, homework accommodations. You may have some additional instruction, not specialized instruction, but maybe they're in an additional work group to work on spelling or math or, things like that. Okay, seating accommodations, any kind of that kind of stuff is really what your 504 plan is. And I'm not a big fan of them, only because they're very, very hard to enforce. And you really have to stay on your 504 coordinator and all of the teachers. Whereas an IEP, if you actually have special education and you qualify for an IEP, you can build into your plan goals that kind of force the issue. Okay. So an IEP is basically, it's unique to every child. So, I a lot of times, if I'm going to an ARD and somebody is trying to say, well, that's just not how the school does it, or, well, we haven't done that before. My smart aleck answer is, I said, well, where's the I in that IEP? Because I'm not hearing anything that tells me it's individualized. Okay. So what you're looking for are the things that your student needs based on where they are, okay, that are going to help keep them in a trajectory to go forward. And we use this term in advocacy land, and it's a great term for parents to have. And it's FAPE, free and appropriate education. And what that means is your child is entitled to a free and appropriate public education. That does not mean it's the best education. Okay, it's what's appropriate for that student. And that's the one that gets a little tricky, because you basically, a lot of school districts will say, well, what we're doing is appropriate. And a lot of times we have to prove them wrong. Okay. It contains written statements of present levels of performance. You have to baseline, because what you're doing is you're creating measurable annual goals where you have to measure performance, but you have to know where they are. And those goals must be agreed upon. And I kind of put in big letters, you are part of the team. You are the quarterback of an IEP team. So you're going to go into a room, as some of you already have, and there's going to be, 15 other people in the room, OTs, PT, speech, whatever. There's going to be all these other people in the room, but you are the boss, okay, because you know your child best. They are only advisors to you, okay, but you're the customer. So just keep that in mind, okay, because it can be very intimidating. The other thing is, what you're doing is you're providing a plan for measuring how we're going to meet goals. And the other thing is that there's case law now that says your goals cannot be the minimus, meaning, you actually have to have challenging goals. We just saw a goal the other day that said this one child over the course of 36 weeks was going to learn like 3 vowel sounds, which is ludicrous. Right? 3 vowel sounds should take, a week, not 36. Okay. And then it also defines the reporting frequency of progress, which typically you should get an IEP update with actual specific numbers that are attributed to the goal progress. You should get those usually with about the same time you get a report card. Okay. The IEP is a contract. So it's really, really important. And I'll talk through my tips later on. It's really important that you treat it that way. You don't sign anything until you're sure you know what it is. You don't allow anybody to have you sign a blank document. You do not have to agree. You can review the document if you need to, because usually it's very overwhelming and you need time. So there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm not going to sign agreement right now. I want to read the document. You wouldn't sign a contract in any other way buying a house or a car. This is even far more important. Okay, so getting services, and this comes into play when you have a child who may not have services yet, or a child who may be receiving services, but there's something new that has occurred that would require additional evaluation. And Child Find is what it is the public school. So even if you have a child that's homeschooled, private school, charter, whatever it is, the school is required to locate and evaluate all children suspected of a disability. Okay, but they have to kind of know that. Usually a parent can request, which again, you do it in writing. A lot of times you may have a school employee that suspects something's up and may, just request, evaluations. The Child Find is one that um, is real interesting, because in the state of Texas, they're very limited with the dollars for education, and they were actually found. There was a substantial, you can go back and Google it, but there was a substantial lawsuit that the federal government filed against Texas because they were purposely putting arbitrary caps on the number of children they would allow into special ed. And the national average is about 13%, and they were capping at 8.5%. So they got their hands slapped, and they lost some federal funding because of it. And they're actually having to make up for what they did. So sometimes we'll find that they'll overlook. They'll put a kid into RTI, into a response to intervention, if they have reading problems for 2 to 3 years. And quite honestly, if a child is not responding to intervention within the first year, there's probably an issue. So how do I get services? I'm going to just breeze through this because obviously some of you have been through this, but it's, if you're just starting out, or again, you have something that happens that's new, there's evidence that you need to provide. There's different hurdles that you have to jump through, and this will be part of the presentation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because obviously y'all have, I'm assuming that our older kids have IEPs at this point. If your child, by the way, is on a 504 plan and you believe that that's not enough, you can request an evaluation. Okay. So what happens is the school will go through a battery of tests, and I did get a question asking, like, what kind of test should I expect for TBI, and I'll walk through that in a minute. But also, they should walk through, you'll have to consent to testing, and they should walk through all the things that they want to test. I actually have a book that I'll show at the end that is like our Bible, and it kind of helps you know what kind of tests are out there or what things can be tested. Okay. If your child is ineligible for a service, or in the case of the older kids, they say, you know what, we think they're doing great. We want to discontinue services. You have the right to question that evidence that they have, And you have the right to ask for what's called an independent evaluation at the at the school's expense. Again, do it in writing. And there's all sorts of, I have some resources later, but if you just Google IEE form document, you will find one. Okay, so again, I kind of touched on evaluations. There are all sorts of different ways to evaluate kids, and each one is different depending on how verbal a child is, and where they are with regards to, age, abilities, and things like that. But these are kind of the big ones: the Wechsler, the Stanford-Binet, the Woodcock-Johnson. These are all your intellectual tests, and sometimes they can do a mix and match because the LSSP, who, by the way, should be doing the test, not a diagnostician. I'm going to make that real clear. Diagnosticians should not be the ones doing the testing. It should be under an LSSP, a licensed school psychology. Sorry, I had to take a drink. But anyway, these are really, really important for TBI kids, any kids that are neurodiverse. We really want to have these kind of tests done. We also have achievement tests that should be done as well that complement. So you usually have your cognitive tests, and then you have your achievement tests that are looking specifically at skills with regards to comprehension and different types of expression. We can see through education tests or achievement tests how a student learns more effectively. Are they better at listening? Do they need to have more, visual or, more experiential? It helps us understand academically where a child is and where their strengths and weaknesses are. And then there's other assessments. You can have personality tests. If you have a child that is really struggling with behaviors, what we do is we ask for, this has to be asked for separately. But I mean, you can ask for it at the same time as a full individual evaluation, an FIE. It's an FBA, a functional behavioral assessment, and that should be done by somebody who is typically trained in functional behaviors, a BCBA, a board certified behavioral analyst. Should really be doing that kind of testing. And then what comes from that is what we call the BIP, the Behavioral Intervention Plan, which then has its own set of goals and things like that. Executive function is really prevalent for neurodiverse kids and kids with TBI. So whenever I go into, or when I have gone into an ARD or asking for evaluations, I will ask for an executive function assessment. The one I like is called the BRIEF, and for the life of me, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but I know if I ask an LSSP for the BRIEF, they know what I'm talking about. And what that does is it looks at executive function, which I could spend another whole day talking about executive function. And but basically what we're looking at are the neurotransmitters that deal with motivation, emotional regulation, organization, planning. You may have a kid who gets flooded very easily when they're asked to do multiple things at once. So it looks at those kind of things. If you get a chance, understood.com does a great job of explaining executive function. And by the way, a lot of schools don't quite understand it or understand how to deal with it. So it's really important for our TBI kids that we are looking at that, because a child may be brilliant academically, but if they can't manage their homework, or, especially as they get older, changing classes, or even something as simple as, I'll give you an example. When my daughter was in kindergarten, she was asked to draw a house, and she had a meltdown, and nobody could figure out why she was having a meltdown. Well, it turns out that she could not visualize a house as being a bunch of shapes. And instead, she had to be told, okay, draw a square, a square. Now draw a triangle on top of the square. They had to break it down for her. And that's when we started to see, like, hey, there's something more to what's going on than just, you know, having a meltdown. And then you can have, obviously, subject tests, speech and language, vocabulary. The neuropsych test is a very large battery of tests. They're very expensive. Typically, if we aren't getting good results from a school, that's when we go in and ask for neuropsychological tests. And then there's transition assessments, which should start by their 14th birthday. And for kids with autism, it's younger. But that's where we're actually doing person-centered assessments to understand, what a child is interested in, what their propensity is to go to college or vocational school, and what path we want to try to get them on so that they're prepared for adulthood. So, as I said before on 504s, I'm not a huge fan. I'll put that out really clear, right out there. But if you have an issue where you need, you're trying to understand how to make your needs met, it's really, really important that, number one, if you have questions, you put them in writing. Now, you also want to know who's responsible for providing each accommodation. So if you're in elementary school, obviously you're going to have most likely one teacher that's charged with this. It gets harder when you're talking about high school, middle school, and high school, because you have a whole cadre of teachers, and sometimes they don't get the 504 documentation, or there's so many of them that they haven't had a chance to review it. So it's really important to understand, reach out to the people that are providing the service, be very friendly about, I just want to let you know, this is kind of what we're talking about. Again, in writing, making sure that they're Johnny on the spot when it comes to your kids' accommodations. Things to look for. Obviously, if your child is verbal, you want to talk to them like, hey, have you noticed if you get this, blah, blah, blah. You want to look at their homework. If you've made a change, you want to give it some time so you can see it. And then you can ask for a hearing. I'll show what you can actually do, but I can't stress enough, these should not be phone conversations. These should be in writing. Okay, always, always, always. Same with IEPs. And Vigo, you had a mention about goals. So the way to avoid goal traps, which when I talk about goal traps, those are when a goal is so vague that they can say it was met, but you really don't have a clear evidence that a goal was met. And what we do is we call these SMART goals, or specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. Okay, so a goal has to be measurable. It has to be something that a child can do. And again, we don't want to sandbag them. We want to give them challenging goals. Okay, it has to be relevant. So, math goals are going to be math goals. If, they have PT goals, and they also have to be timely, meaning time driven. So by a certain date, so-and-so, given these accommodations or instruction, are going to do these things so many times out of so many times. Okay. It's all about data collection, because what you want to be able to do is when you get progress reports, you want to be able to see the data. And if they're not collecting the data, then they're not doing their job. All right. Something that I never allow is teacher observation as a way to measure, because that's subjective. I want to know Are they getting a certain grade on tests? Are there, we also want to make sure that any evaluations that are, already peer researched and evidence-based are done. We want to use standard methods. Okay. So if you're getting something that says, oh, well, the student is like 30% of the goal. I don't know what 30% of a goal is. I don't know what 30% of what. We want to understand how many times they're going to be expected to do the task and how many times we expect them to do it right. Okay. Oops, sorry. Again, quarterly reports. If you don't get a report, get on their cases. Okay, so my tips really quickly. As your child's advocate, it's work, and I hate to say it because we all have a bazillion other things going on in our lives. I was a single mom, and I worked full time, and I still had to do this stuff, and it was really hard and it was really frustrating. But it will hopefully lessen your headaches. So any evaluation, suggestions, progress, data, all those work products that you will need in order to have an intelligent conversation, you want them well ahead of time. Okay. So if, they're saying, oh, Johnny's handwriting looks great, and then you look at it and it looks like it's hieroglyphics, you need to bring that stuff in. I had a student who was in 8th grade, and they were telling me, oh yeah, he's working up to an 8th grade level, and I brought work product that was clear he was at a 1st grade level. So, when you hold that kind of information in front of their face, you may get a different response, a more positive response. So always have your evidence. Think about it as like Law and Order. You go in with your evidence. You're going in with the facts, not the emotions. And you want to go in with what you want. So you're the boss, create an agenda, and follow the agenda. You can send it to them ahead of time or not, but usually they do this thing where they'll say, okay, we're going to start with parent concerns, or sometimes they won't even ask. That's when I, stop a meeting, time out. I want to go through my agenda first. Okay. Prepare, review everything. And I just said, create an agenda. Make sure you're doing it a few days before the meeting, because another thing that can happen, especially in middle school and high school, is that they have to have a general education teacher be in the room, but it might be the gym teacher, and you really have math issues. So you want to be able to say, you know what, I would like the math teacher there to discuss blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't want the gym teacher there who's going to say, oh, everything's great. I want the people that are affected. Now, you cannot ask for all of the teachers. Okay, because I've had people say, well, I want every teacher that they have. No, 1 or 2 you can get away with, but that's about it. If you have problems across the board, then, you have to kind of look at like tackling them one at a time. But again, you want it in writing. Okay, procedural safeguards. For those of you who have older children, you probably have enough of these, or you've thrown enough of them away to wallpaper several houses. They should be in your native language. A lot of people get them and they don't read them. They are the key to what your rights are and kind of what the process is. So if you've read it ahead of time, a lot of time they like to give it to you like right at the beginning of a meeting. And if they do that and you want to take your time to read it, you have that right. They can go and get a cup of coffee. But really know what it is. And you can actually get a copy of it on the TEA website. Okay. This one is ask a friend, family member, or an advocate to accompany you. And the reason for this is especially for little ones, well, actually for everybody. it's very overwhelming. You're sitting in a room, you might be in there for a couple hours. You're really, negotiating your child's education. It's really hard to keep your wits about you if you're trying to take notes and you're trying to look at your agenda and you're asking questions. So sometimes you can have, a friend or a family member. It has to be somebody who knows your child. Okay. But you can have them come and they could be there for moral support. They could be there to take notes for you. They can, whatever it is you want. But it also is that extra person that's there to sometimes kick you under the table or, whatever it is that you need. So it's really important to have somebody there, because it is, sometimes you feel like it's them against you. Again, you're the quarterback. You have the most valuable insights and you should be prepared to share them. So parent concerns, you know what? My kid is telling me that they are not getting all their standard time. That is just not acceptable, and it's a violation of the ADA. So what are we going to do as a team to make this work better? And we always try to be nice. And then if, you go through this a time or two and they're not responding, then we're not so nice. But start by being nice. Record your meetings and save them. I can't tell you how many times we have gone into mediation or due process where I have been able to pull out a recording and say, well, this is what they said. And letting the hearing officer listen to that, rather than me trying to recount what they said, even from my notes, is like gold. And unfortunately, people say really stupid things sometimes. I hate to say it. Now, some people go, oh, well, I don't want to be adversarial. And the way I go about this is I never say, oh, I'm going to record you because I don't think you're going to tell me the truth. I say, I have a horrible memory and this is a lot of information to throw at me. So I'm going to go ahead and record. Now, usually if you say that, then they will want to record as well, which is fine. But don't expect them to give you a copy. So you need to record them and save them. And like I said, if there's something, sometimes you may want to go back to like a previous IEP from like, a few months ago to remember what it was that was agreed upon. Oh, by the way, and with recording meetings, what I also will do is you get into a section called delibs, and that's all the kind of like the extra stuff that everybody's discussing in the meeting. Recording your meetings allows you to then go back when you get the paper copy of your IEP document and go through and make sure everything was in there. Okay. Evaluations drive goals. So you want to make sure you have the right evaluations being done, and you can ask for new ones if they aren't done. Like let's say they didn't do an OT eval, and you're like, you know what, I have, they're getting private OT right now. I think an OT needs to look at them. You can ask for that in writing. Okay. But evaluations and the baselines from evaluations are what drive goals. Goals drive services, and then obviously accommodations and placement. If your goals are weak, your services will be weak. So if you have a child who needs considerable PT intervention and you have not written good goals that are going to hold the PT accountable to progress, I guarantee you will probably get what they call a PT consult, which basically means they're going to check in on your child maybe 15 minutes a month. They're not giving direct services. Okay. You also can't just go in and go, well, I want a TA for my kid. I want a teacher's assistant full-time. You have to start from the driving goals. What is it about the goals that are going to require your child to have that accommodation. Okay. Do not agree to the ARD in the meeting, ever, 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 ever. And do not waive the 5-day rule. And they will look at you like you have lobsters coming out of your ears. But there's a good reason for this. There is nothing that is going to be so monumental that it has to be implemented within 5 days. What you want to be able to do is get the paper copy of the ARD or the IEP document. You want to review it against your recordings. You want to make sure it's what you agreed to, okay? If there's something that even you agreed to and you wait a minute, now that I'm reading this again, it doesn't make sense, then you can go ahead and you can, basically you could disagree. And that means that they have to come back within so many days to re-review. Now, if you keep doing this over and over, eventually they can just say, we're done. But that's typically not the case. You can usually get this knocked out in one ARD or within that 5 days. Sometimes I'll say, well, my client wants to review all the documents. I'm sure everything's fine, but we just want to make sure we got everything. So they're going to go home and read it. And then most likely, if it's fine, they'll come back tomorrow morning and it's all good. Sometimes they'll say, oh, well, we have to recess, blah, blah, blah. And they'll say, well, you're going to have to come back to ARD. Okay, we'll do it by phone. I'll give you the agreement if everything's good, and you move on. Okay. If you disagree, please do it in writing. And why you disagree. See, I kind of jump ahead. You can disagree. And then they have to reconvene within 10 days to remedy that disagreement. That could be a disagreement on services, placement, goals, okay, minutes that your child is getting, accommodations, anything that's in that contract. If you are not crystal clear on what it is and how it's going to work, a lot of times I will tell parents, when you're writing goals, the one question asked is, how will this be implemented in the classroom? And spend the time trying to figure that out so that you literally, you walk out that door and you know what's going to happen. And remember, if you're on an IEP, you can call, and actually on a 504, you can call a meeting anytime, okay? That is your right. And usually what you do is if you want to call an ARD, you send a request in writing telling them why you want to call an ARD. Okay, so the plan isn't working. I'm checking my time here. Okay, what to do when something isn't working? I think you got that. I've said it about 50,000 times. Put it in writing. Do not let your emotions get in the way. And there's a reason, I'm going to explain it in a minute. Be polite. Provide specific examples. Okay. Start with your child's teacher, their SPED teacher. You can copy the principal if you want. And then if you're still not getting anywhere, you can work your way up the chain. So we have what's called level 1, 2, 3 complaints. It starts with the principal. So you're sending official notice that, there's an issue, or you have a complaint. It goes to the principal. If you don't get anywhere, it goes to, you send something to superintendent. And then if it still doesn't go anywhere, you can actually go to a level 3, which means you're going to present in front of the school board. And I highly recommend that if you ever have to do a level 3 complaint, you have a cheering section with you and you have your facts. It's because that is your moment to that is your moment to shine. Okay, always get your replies in writing. So sometimes, we'll say, oh, I saw that email from you. I just wanted to tell you, what I thought. I will typically say, well, could you just send me an email reply? Okay. It doesn't have to be, a formal letterhead or anything. Just send me an email. If you have a meeting with the school, you are recording it, of course. And this is not an ARD meeting or anything. but send an email summarizing the conversation completely with next steps, who's accountable, what decisions were made. And then usually what I will tell people to say is, if I've left anything out or misstated anything, please let me know by such and such a date. Give them like 3 days. If you haven't heard anything back, then that's the gospel. Okay, and that can be admissible later on. Nobody wants to get, nobody wants to have to go to mediations or due process or anything like that. But you always have to think that that could happen. And remember that the people that are going to be reviewing the documents that you've created are going to look at them not as a parent who's frustrated. They're not going to know who your child is. So it's really important. I was always taught, write it as though the man in the black robe is going to have to interpret it. So be very clear, be concise, be courteous, have your facts. If you have work product you want to attach, absolutely. But it's crucially important. Also, if you have recordings, that helps too. It's really, really important down the line. And I hope that nobody ever has to go through mediation or due process, but I have to tell you that so many parents think, oh, well, you know, so-and-so's so nice and, you know, it's going to be okay. And then so-and-so might be really nice, but they might win the lottery and then they're gone, or they forget, or, you know, who knows what could happen. But it's really important that it's not a trust factor as much as it is protection of your child. And then one of the other things we do is it's called a Gebser letter. It's probably one of them. I actually put a link here so you can look at the article. It says why it's the most important letter you'll ever write. It's a letter that basically notifies the school what they did wrong, but it's in a more legalese kind of way. It's not the friendly email. It's a formal letter that is documents what the child was entitled and what has happened and what remedies you're looking for. Okay. Last resort on the 504, you can go to mediation, but I'll be honest with you, it's difficult. Okay, it's very difficult because you have to really have your evidence in check. You do that by writing to TEA. You can have an impartial hearing by writing to the school district. I tend to not like those because you don't get a say in what the resolution is going to be. It's the hearing officer that's going to decide. And you can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. You have to do this within 180 days. Now, since Betsy DeVos has come into town, the OCR process, civil right for the Department of Education, has really, really lost its teeth. And it takes a much longer time than it used to. Also, if you file an OCR complaint, excuse me, if you file an OCR complaint, TEA will not look at the issue. So try to solve it first with locally, and then state, and then go to civil rights. But don't let it go on for more than 180 days. And I have a really good source from understood.org that walks you through some of that. Same with the IEP plan. Mediation, okay. That is where basically you're going to lay out all of the things that they have done in not providing your appropriate education and what that amounts to in compensatory, meaning let's just say your child wasn't getting the PT that they were supposed to get and you're able to prove that. Okay, you can get compensatory private PT services that they have to pay for. Things like that. You can file due process complaints. Now, I always recommend going to mediation first because it becomes a negotiation. And then if you don't like what you're getting, you can always walk away from the table. Due process complaints, and you can do them with an advocate or an attorney, or you could do what we call pro se, and which is on your own. You can do that, but again, it's like going to court. You present your case, they present their case, and the hearing officer is going to decide. Keep in mind, by the way, TEA pays hearing officers, so they're on the TEA payroll. So, take that with a grain of salt. You can file a complaint with TEA, obviously, and you can file federal complaints with Office of Civil Rights. But like I said, if you're going to file a complaint with one, don't necessarily file a complaint with the other, because one will point at the other and say, well, that person's handling it, so we're going to close the case. And then there's always a lawsuit. Now, I don't take that very lightly. That's something you want to do if something is extremely egregious, and you've basically you've tried all your options. Okay, that's when we have some very good attorneys in town, and that's where you can call me and go, okay, I think I need an attorney, and I can help you based on what your issues are, help you find one. ADA violation, same thing, mediation, due process complaints, and then you can file with ada.gov. You can file a complaint. I actually had to do this for the University of Texas in San Antonio, and we did win. And UTSA had to basically spend about $14 million to make their campus accessible, because there were a lot of things that we found while my daughter was going there that weren't quite up to snuff. And of course, there's lawsuits, but that they're very costly. Just, like these attorneys, they do want retainers, and some of them can be as low as, maybe $1,500 all the way up to $15,000 plus, depending on the type of lawsuit it is, and if they think they're going to have to go to appeals. So how are you going to be effective? You're going to be organized. You're going to pay attention to the details. And I say research, research, research. It's really important so that you understand what your rights are. So really research them. Be persistent. Please try not to be emotional. And I know that's really, really hard. Yell and scream at home. But then when you're communicating, it has to be the facts. Know what it is you want for your child, because as you're planning their career, you want to be able to have a vision that you've created either for your child or with your child as they get older. And I always say, I did this with my own daughter. I introduced her to people who could serve as role models, which then kind of gave her some ideas of what she wanted to do. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There is help. You have to know where to look. And this will get sent out, but TEA, obviously I put that in there just so you know what their thinking is. There's parent to parent. If you don't belong as a member, it's a really great organization. They have mentoring and things like that. Disability Rights Texas, great organization, but quite honestly, they are very, very overworked. I think they only have like one advocate and one attorney in Central Texas. So, but they are a resource. Rights Law, the book that I'm talking about is Emotions to Advocacy. It is my Bible. Right Law, Pete Wright is the guy who has really spent his career working in education law. Texas Region 13 is the training facility. You are actually allowed to take any training that the teachers have. So and also sometimes I like to take the training just to see what the teachers are learning. The PATH Project is a great parent training center. They have workshops on all different types of things, transitions, the law, things like that. oh, I'm sorry, it's not understood.com, it's understood.org. Great website, use it all the time. It's a great website for parents when you're just looking for plain spoken advice. Obviously, there's advocates. Now, not every advocate is the same. How I work as an advocate is very different than what a fine colleague of mine does. Some are really quick to play the heavy and they're going to take you to mediation. Some are going to be more therapeutic with you, trying to help you organize and teach you. Everyone's different. And Rhonda knows that if you guys come to me, I'm going to try and refer you to somebody who I think might be a good fit, because also every advocate specializes in something different too. So some people are better at dyslexia. I know I'm horrible at dyslexic stuff, so I will pass that on to somebody. But if ADHD, there's somebody else who specializes in that. There are some good attorneys in town. And if you ever are looking for advocates or attorneys, you can go to COPA.org. That's the organization that we all belong to. So I think I've kind of summed this up, but my last thing to say is just breathe and take really good care of yourself. I know this is such a hard time for everybody right now. COVID has thrown everything up in the air. But you've got this, and there's help, and just take care of yourself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. All righty. Chelsea, do we have any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Let's see here. Let me turn.
And I'm sorry, you guys, if I was racing through this, because like I said, there was a lot, and you will get the presentation too. So.
Okay, Miss Taylor is asking, is the blocking of sidewalks so wheelchairs or walkers can't get through an ADA violation?
Yes. So,
Okay.
if that's happening where like it's a school drop off, that's typically where I see it happening. Then you should let the school know in writing. What they should do is have somebody out there either blocking the sidewalk or, putting up cones or whatever it is. Because now you've let them know that they're in violation and they have to fix it. So if they don't, and again, do this in writing. And if they don't, you can take it up the chain. You can file an ADA, ADA complaint. I actually, when I talked about University of Texas, I gave them ample opportunity to fix their curb cuts, which were horrible, and they didn't do it. So they had to fix every curb cut. So it cost them a lot of money if they would have just fixed the 3 that I asked for. So, anything else?
Is assistance with completing meals included? I feel like this is a stupid question, but my son has not mastered feeding himself, nor do I think he will before school starts. Will someone help him eat lunch at his school?
Okay, so there's a couple ways of looking at this. One, if a child is having trouble eating lunch because it's due to an occupational therapy issue, then there should be an OT evaluation that is requested and done so that they can put together the plan for eating, the assistance and goals towards independent eating. So that's one way to handle it if you're talking about an IEP and you're trying to work on progress. If you have a child who is maybe they just either don't eat for whatever reason. I mean, you kind of have to have the medical reason why they're not doing it. But you can, get doctor's orders as part of a 504 and go back and say, you know what, I need, basically be clear on what you need. So I need somebody to sit with my child and make sure that they eat their lunch because let's say it's, it creates a nutritional deficit, or maybe there's a behavioral issue or something like that. So there's different ways to skin that cat, but the answer is yes, you can get, you definitely can get help. I have kids that are, have to be G-tube fed. So, any others?
Yes, ma'am. The next one says, my son's school did that to me at the last 2 ARDs, put a gym teacher in. Okay, so
what do you do? Okay, so let's just say you went in, you didn't ask for anybody in particular. There's a couple ways of handling it. You can continue with the ARD, but call a recess until they can have the people that you want there. I prefer to let them know ahead of time, but if you're not happy with the person that is there to represent Gen Ed, you can always stop it and say, you know what, I think we're moving in a great direction. However, the issues that we have here, I really need to have the math teacher for. I'd like to, just recess this ARD and reschedule for a time when that person can be there. Okay.
okay. Next one, what would be some good accommodations for a Thai student? Oh, is it probably TBI student that is flooding?
So flooding, I'm assuming when you say flooding, you're meaning, executive, there's executive function issues where they need to have their work chunked. So if you have any evidence that that's the issue, if it's under a 504, you can request chunking. If the child's under an IEP, you can as well. But then what I like to do for IEP is I try to say, okay, I want you to chunk, we're going to try to help them increase the amount of information they can process. I want to get a child to go from two-step problems to 3-step. But you can request, again, that's something where you want to be able to show evidence that it's a problem. So if you have behavioral issues, if you have any kind of schoolwork that shows that evidence, you go in with those facts, and then you can request either the accommodation or as part of the IEP. So I'm hoping I answered that. Because I get a lot of kids that have to be chunked. And by the way, if your child's on an IEP and you have not, and especially with TBI, and they have not done an executive function assessment, please request that, because that definitely will show that it needs to be done. Also, in any cognitive testing, you'll be able to see it. When it comes to kids with TBI, there's a couple areas to look at when you're looking at these massive assessments, which my other thing that I kind of touched on, but I want to be real clear about, do not allow somebody to go over an assessment with you sight unseen in an ARD. If they can't give you the information ahead of time so you can review it and ask questions, reschedule the ARD, period. Because these are big documents that you've probably never seen before, that you're trying to understand. You can schedule a meeting with the LSSP ahead of time and have them walk you through this. But kiddos will typically with TBI have processing speed issues, which means they're going to need more time to write things down. They may need to see things visually and hear it. They may need to have somebody help them write it down so they remember, like in their planner. They may also need, they may need chunking. And so that, a cognitive test will show that stuff. The other thing that kiddos with TBI typically have are working memory issues. And a working memory issue is where it's what's going into your brain in the moment. So you have short-term, long-term, and working memory. Long-term obviously is, I remembered my days of my youth. Short term is I remember, what's happened within the last 24 hours. And then you have working memory is I've just taken in information and I have to process it and I have to basically spit something back out, the output. It gets lost, so that by the time I'm trying to process it, I've already forgotten what it was that I was being asked to do. Okay, that is so common, which means you definitely, if you have cognitive testing already done, if you've had those evaluations, those kind of things are there. Those are your fact-based evidence that show that your child needs those accommodations. I hope that I answered that. And by the way, guys, if I didn't answer it exactly the way you wanted, you can always email me or reach out to Rhonda, and I'll tell you more.
We have a question. What exact cognitive tests are these called?
Okay, so basically there's, as I had shown before, and you guys will get copies of it, there's there's a plane going over my house. Okay, so I live right by an airport. Okay, so there's cognitive testing, which is those are your Wechslers. It's your tests of intelligence. All of a sudden I have to sneeze, sorry. Excuse me. So your Wechslers, your Stanford Binet's, things like that. What they're testing are processing speeds, how your child, takes memory, how they take in information, how long it takes them, which ways they take in information best. It'll show you working memory issues. It'll show you, or strengths. It'll show you what we call crystallized knowledge. Crystallized knowledge is what are the life experiences that I have, and what are the life experiences my child has in order to apply logic to something they're hearing. Because sometimes kiddos can have, they might have kind of their working memory is kind of, a little bit off, but they might have really strong crystallized knowledge through the things that you've given them and experiences that can actually help them. So all of that is looked at when we're talking about cognitive testing. It's, they do have some IQ stuff and things like that, but I really look at it from how is my child taking in information? What's the best way they're going to take it in? How are they processing it? How are they able to then spit things back out? At what speed? And, how is their memory working? How are all those neurotransmitters firing? That's what we want to know. Okay. So when you're going in for a test, so let's just say you have a kiddo who's either never been on an IEP, on a 504, and you decide you want to get what we call a full individual evaluation. That includes cognitive testing, academic achievement. Okay, those are your two main. It might be OTPT and speech if there's underlying issues that are apparent. That's where we start. I always like to do executive function because our kiddos with TBI or neurodiverse typically have executive function issues. So those are kind of your basics. And there's within the book that I was talking about, by the way, I get nothing for this book, but I highly recommend it. They do go through a lot of the tests and what they do. Anything else?
We have a couple more. Okay. How do I know if I should ask for a 504 plan or an IEP?
So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I have asked the school to evaluate my child. Will this determine which one he will have?
Okay. So if you've requested a full individual evaluation in writing, they have so many days to basically accept or deny the request. Most schools will not deny unless they're like, it's got to be pretty egregious. But anyway, always go with an evaluation first, okay? Or at least put that into the works, because it takes time. Because by the time you get one done, give or take, they have 45 days from this date and 30 days. There's like all these different timelines. And, it might take you a semester to get all those tests, but you want them in flight, because the IEP is you're going to be your strongest weapon to manage your child's academics. Excuse me. All of a sudden, my allergies are kicking in. Sorry. And a 504 is my kid does not. I don't believe my kiddo needs specialized instruction, which most of our kids with TBI don't fall into that category. So you want to go for the IEP first. If you're denied the IEP, or I mean, if they deny you and they say, oh, there's not enough here, that's when you request an individual an independent evaluation at their expense. The IEP is the gold standard. I am not a fan of 504 at all. Now, 504, the Rehab Act 504, Section 504, is in itself part of an IEP. It's the accommodations part, but the IEP is what has the teeth. The 504 can be determined. You are not part of the 504 team, although I think it's really rude if they don't include you. Decisions can be made on 504s that don't include you. And I have found that 504s are really, really hard to monitor. So IEP all the way. Okay.
Okay, I think we have a couple more.
Okay.
I recently was told a 504 plan goes with the child to college and the IEP ends with high school. Is this correct?
No. in a nutshell, no. The protections under Section 504, okay, not the 504 document, but the protections. So Section 504, that the actual law is, I can't discriminate against your child, okay? That is what Section 504 is. I have to provide your child with accommodations that basically provide them equity with other students so that they can have access to education. It's access, okay, not free and appropriate. It's just access to education. So what happens when you go to college, and I've been through this more than once, unfortunately, as my daughter's switched schools. What you do is you have to go to the Office for Disability Services. Do it before your child starts. In fact, I even recommend going when your child is deciding what school they want to go to. Meet with them. They're going to have requirements, whether it's evaluations, doctors, doctor's notes, anything like that. Yes, you can bring your 504 from high school, but that does not mean they're going to honor it. And I'll give you an example. My daughter, this is even between colleges, my daughter at ACC had test center, which meant because she gets distracted, so she could go to the test center. When we took her to UTSA, even though I had, a whole accommodation plan that was protected under 504, UTSA said, well, we don't want to give her that because, we see that they did it, but we need you to prove to us that she needs it. So I went and did a whole new neuropsych, which cost me $2,000 to prove to them that she needed it, which I was not real happy about. But colleges do not fall under the same, each one of them's different. Yes, they have to provide accommodations. How they do that, it may not look anything like what you had in high school, and it's not a given. So you don't get to just walk in with a 504 plan and say, here you go, or an IEP. They don't look at those either. Okay. So have documentation of your child's disability, all brand new. If you have a child that's on an IEP, so we talk about triennial evaluations, your child gets evaluated every 3 years. Have your last evaluation done in your child's last year of high school. Okay. And the reason is then that carries over. You can use that as your evidence when you go to college. Problem is, like with what happened with my daughter, is she had one. We were great when we went to the first 2 colleges, but then by the time she got to the 3rd one, and it had been years, they said, oh, sorry, that one's too old. So get them done toward the end of your child's career. And by the way, you can request them. You don't have to just, go, oh, well, sorry, sophomore year is actually when the triennials due. No, I want you to do another set before they graduate. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, ma'am. Let's see here. Would you suggest these cognitive tests be done in the AM or PM when my son gets his 3-year evaluation? I'm asking because as the day goes on, he gets brain fatigued, and we need to see how he does as he gets tired / stimulated / flooded. I was here a bit. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was here a bit late to the meeting. Are you yourself an advocate for children with TBI?
So I am, to answer that question, I am an advocate. I used to do special ed up until recently. My child has hydrocephalus, very similar with regards to presentation and comorbidities and things like that to TBI. The only difference is she was born with it. She didn't acquire it. So a lot of the things I'm talking about with regards to neurodiversity, testing, cognitive, they especially apply for TBI. So I consider myself part of the tribe, but my kiddo just, like I said, she was born with it. Okay, so the other question, cognitive morning or evening. My recommendation is that testing be done. I don't think you should do testing only when the child's at their best. It should be broken up so that you're seeing a little bit of everything. Now, because some kids, like, they're on ADHD meds and they're rocking and rolling in the morning, which is great. So you're going to get these great results, but then by the afternoon, which is where they really need the support, they're not able to function. So we need to be able to see that. So an LSSP should be, looking at those things also, especially if you have a child that's flooding in the afternoon. I would highly recommend having a classroom observation by your LSSP or the LSSP primarily, because you want to see you want them to do is you want to see what is happening. When we do, for instance, a functional behavioral assessment, which may be another way of going about this for the flooding, what we're looking for, especially if they're having meltdowns, we want to collect data so that we understand what time of day, what were the conditions, what was the request, what was the response, how was it reinforced or not? Because all of those things, behavior is communication. So all of those things that exist, we need to know, like, if your child's flooding, what are they flooding in? Is it math? Is it reading? Is it science? What is it? Is it a certain time of day? Do we need to, if we know it's a certain time of day, do we need to give them a planned break? Is it something where nutritionally they need something else at lunch that's going to help them through the afternoon, or a med? You want to really collect that data. So if you're running into flooding issues, behavioral issues, even if it's like, it doesn't have to be like bouncing off the wall behavior. It could be a child shuts down. and just refuses to work, that's a behavior. That's communication. So we need to understand what's prompting that. And so having an observation done is really important, but then having the cognitive testing to sit alongside of that starts to show you like, hey, my kiddo is really struggling with, he's having a real hard time with math timetables. Well, it's because he's being flooded. He has his processing speed isn't great. His working memory isn't great. And oh, by the way, he might have some dyscalculia, which is a math disability. So what kind of accommodations do we want to give him to help him be able to succeed in math? Okay. So you can kind of see how that all fits into place. I hope I explained that adequately. And chat, you could always send a chat and say, no, you didn't answer my question. I won't be offended. Anything else?
One more. Says my son's 3-year evaluation is being done by an LSSP. This LSSP is new and being overseen by an LSSP in the district, as well as someone in his college. We are 1 year out from my son's TBI. Should we require someone more experienced? Also, what book were you referring to on the testing?
Okay, so I've had great success with new LSSPs, believe it or not, that are supervised by others. In fact, my neuropsych was done by somebody who was actually still in her clinical internship, and she did a phenomenal job. And then she was overseen. Okay, so meet the LSSP and then make your decision from that. If they seem like they're, pretty on the ball, then go with them. If for some reason they do it and you don't like anything they did, remember you always have that option to get an independent evaluation, and that's a real great reason for having one. If you're, that if you had to use an excuse like why you would disagree, well, I don't feel that they had adequate training in order to do the cognitive testing that my child needed. Now, that's the excuse if you disagree. But quite honestly, it really depends on the person, because like I said, I have met great LSSPs that had been doing it for 20 years. I've met horrible ones. And same with the young ones too. So sometimes it's actually an added bonus if you have somebody who's newer and they're being supervised by 2 other people, then it's worth it. It may be fine, but just make sure you meet them and you're comfortable.
Okay, let's see here. The flooding is infrequent and it can come off as behavioral. It's both hyperness or closed off and not work. A lot of it may be from being tired from a long day, plus all the things you mentioned, slow processing speed, dyscalculia, anxiety around math, but definitely just tired. Thank you so much for answering all of my questions.
Good. I'm glad I answered them. I get a lot of these. Like I said, I always say behavior is communication. So what is he trying to tell you? And yeah, it could be all of those things. I've had kids that shut down. I've had kids that, run through the school. So, they're clearly, and then there's also 2 reasons for behavior as well. One is attention and one is avoidance. So what is he trying to avoid? When is he trying to avoid it? And how do we preempt that? That can be done, again, you can ask for, even if it's infrequent, it's really important to collect data, because it may not be as infrequent as you think. It's just when you're hearing about it. So have classroom observation done, have them do, they can even do like a 2-week data collection for you, especially if you think it's in the afternoon. But I would monitor afternoon and morning, and that does not take a ton of work. It could be a tick sheet. I actually have little check sheets that I put together for some kids who are really, really, really that shut down. And I want to know everything down to like what the temperature of the room is, which is pretty excessive. But some kids react. Anything else?
Let's see. I was given your information from Rhonda. I plan to reach out to you. Let's see. I plan to reach out so you can fit me with a good advocate. I know nothing about any of these processes. I don't even know where to begin. Is that okay? My son is 2, so I have a little time, but I feel so overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's Taylor. So, no, I expect your call. And I actually reached out to some of my, I wanted to see who was really good with PPCD, who actually had availability too. But the first thing that I really want you to do is all of you go on Amazon. The book is called Emotions to Advocacy. And I actually, where did I put my copy? I don't have it now. Anyway, I had it here earlier. It's a phenomenal book that explains pretty much everything I've talked about. It's a great resource. And it also gives you resources. And also, I gave you my list of resource websites that you can use as well. So, it's Emotions to Advocacy. Pete Wright has some other books like Effective IEPs and, how to read evaluations and all that stuff. That's really advanced stuff. Just learn the basics and remember, get it in writing and record it. If you can remember those things, you'll be fine. Okay. So I just saw this collection of data. So are you talking about collection of data during COVID, or are you talking about collection of data in the classroom? I kind of need to know that. Because if you're, okay, so if we're talking collection of data in the classroom, even for you. So, okay, school year. Okay, so you have a sneaking suspicion that your son is struggling in the afternoon. Okay, so what I've done is whether it's a 504 or an IEP, I don't care. Okay, I basically in writing say, look, there's clearly something going on here. I'm seeing this, right? These are my facts. I would like you to do this now. And then I'd like to meet to discuss what you saw. Now I'm going to tell you, I have run into kiddos who will be totally anxiety ridden in class and don't act out. And then they have bowel accidents on their way home on the bus. Okay. And the school tells me, oh, everything's been fine. Okay. When you start to look at like, what are all those little things that they do? Did they shut down? Did they, did they fidget in their chair? Things like that. Think of all of the things that maybe you've seen because you've had this time with them now, but also some things that you've heard anecdotally, and have them just create a tick sheet. And you know what, if they don't want to keep the data, like if they don't want to try to collect data for you, and like try to analyze it, one way to do it is just to create a little like communication sheet, and you create the tick sheet, make it easy for them. Like a lot of times I would tell teachers, I'm like, look, I know you're busy, so I'm going to create the tick sheet so you can just use it, and then let them just send it home at the end of the day. And then you could start to look for patterns. Now, if you can also, like I said, you can in writing request a functional behavioral assessment where they're going to do classroom observation. They're going to do some some different personality and behavioral tests. A lot of them are survey tests where they're going to have a teacher fill some things out, and then they have you fill some things out. And they're basically looking at personality traits. And it runs the whole gamut. So they're called like the ABAS, ABAS. There's some other ones, but you can do that. And then what you can, and then you can use that to determine if you need accommodations in a certain way. I hope that helps. And if not, if it's a specific, if you want to get a lot more specific with me, Rhonda has my info, and I'm happy to talk to you, to kind of get into more detail. Because it's hard. I'm trying to be real general, but sometimes I have to know the specifics. Anything else?
Don't see any more.
Great. Well, I hope this helped all of you. Like I said, I apologize that it was so much information in such a small amount of time. Rhonda knows I'm always here as a resource. Always, 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 because I believe us mamas got to take care of each other. So, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I really think you've got something that needs to be, excuse me, looked at by an attorney or someone. I'm happy to refer people to you. Okie dokie.
Thank you so much, Michelle. This was wonderful.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome, guys. And I hope everybody stays safe and sane, and all your kiddos stay safe. I know this is a really hard time, and I'm so thankful that my kiddo is out of school right now, because I know I don't know how you guys are doing it right now. I don't know if I could right now. So give yourselves a pat on the back and go get yourselves a glass of wine or whatever it is you like to have. Okay.
Sounds good, Michelle. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.